Hello again, Sifu Sylvain Chamberlain here, once again with you. We're getting close to the end of the year, so I'm going to have a New Year's Eve Gongyo and chanting event, as I do every year. Only now I'll have a proper building to entertain those of you who are close by. I invite you to come over, and what we'll do is we'll start Gongyo, evening Gongyo, at probably around 11:15. What we want to do is get through with the recitation to the fifth meditation, where we can then chant up until the stroke of midnight and into the next year, and then finish Gongyo with the fifth meditation into the new year, which means if you like to count down a few seconds to midnight, it's not really a Buddhist thing. That's up to you. But what we're trying to accomplish is to shift our life from one year into the next. It's a symbolic thing, because what is a year of life, and who determines when it starts and when it stops? And I know some Buddhists who do it at their date of birth. Others believe it should be at the date of inception. So there's all sorts of opinion about that. But it's an occasion that allows us to once again get together, be of one mind and many bodies, Itai Doshin, and enjoy one another's, and energize one another through recitation and chanting. So I'll be doing that this year, as I always do. It's also a form to share dreams and wishes for the upcoming year, and formally in a group gathering, do some letting go of this year and what's happened. So enough on that. Now, I want to start. I don't know if this is going to be a series, or maybe I'll just let this stand independently and just make singular videos on certain subjects about Buddhism. There's a lot more that I want to talk about that's really basic, like what's going on that Gohanzen behind me and what it all means, really take it apart. But I think also, even though, that's part of study, and that's very important, and it helps our understanding and deepens our understanding, and helps give us more motivation to continue, I think there's something that I almost never hear any discussion of, and it's always bothered me. So I thought, well, I'll make a video about it, and maybe there's a lot of other people like me out there who have the same off-putting sensation about something about organized thought of any kind, whether it's a company's philosophy, or a specific religion, or a specific sect of Buddhism. Why do some Buddhists say that Buddhism's a religion? Why do some say absolutely not, Buddhism's not a religion? And they're extant today, all these different sects. I want to say levels, because that's more appropriate, but to the non-initiate, what do they know? Unless you start studying, really studying, you're not going to be able to figure this out. I can't figure it out, because to me it's obvious. If you really do enough studying, it doesn't take long before you understand that, like anything else, like learning math, like learning plumbing, like learning how to write well, like learning music, there's just a hierarchy to things. I mean, you can't start writing wonderful equations describing things in mathematics unless you understand numbers, the language of numbers. So you got to start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you count? Now, what happens when you put them together, take them apart? Then you can substitute letters for numbers you don't know, algebra. And then there are certain ways the world fits together. So we have geometry, trigonometry. Then now we have a good feeling of, wow, this is what we can do with these numbers. This is what we can describe. Now you can go even deeper and deeper. So for somebody to say, yeah, I'm a mathematician, like I'm a Buddhist, but once you get to trigonometry, that is the height, that is the pinnacle, that is the Buddhist teachings. And don't bother me with all that other stuff, calculus and quantum and stuff. That's just made up stuff that came later. That's not Buddha. I don't understand how I can do that. And it's just strange to me that people are so attached, because this is what Buddhism is all about from the get-go, from day one. This is what the Buddha's been teaching. Now, he's had to teach it through many different lessons. He didn't just come up with one sermon and go, okay, got it? Because, well, he tried to do that when he was first enlightened, and it bombed. One reason was, and this may still be the reason today, India, where it started, to this day is still very much a caste system. Not a class system, but a caste system. We have one here in America too, but it's not caste so much as class, but the class of people you belong to in America is really solely based on how much money you got, how much power in finance that you have determines the group you run with. That's America. In India, depending on the region you're born in, the town you're born in, the bloodline you're born in, it actually defines what you're allowed to be in life. I mean, if you're born a farmer in India, a farmer you will be the rest of your life. You cannot entertain. If you told a farmer's son, you could run this country, he couldn't stop laughing at you. Not because he understands the situation. He simply knows. See, that's the way things are when they're inculcated into a culture, right? So when Buddha reached enlightenment, understood the nature of everything, he tried to explain this to people, and he would tell them, you have the Buddha right now. It's inside. You can enlighten yourself. You can awaken to Buddhahood. And, you know, I've often said they looked at him like a deer in the headlights because they didn't understand. But, you know what, that I have to revise that. Yeah, they didn't understand. They didn't understand largely because they weren't of the caste. They weren't of the Brahmin caste. They didn't come from easy for you to say, Siddhartha, son of a kingdom, son of a king, from the warrior clan of the Shakyas. Yeah, sure, you can do it. But not me. I was born to a cobbler's family. I was born in a prostitution family. I'll be a prostitute my whole life. But I still want to know your teaching to how I can lessen my suffering. But they didn't understand the correlation. They couldn't, it just couldn't happen to them. And they had, thousands of years of civilization to inculcate that into their thinking. So, I've said it before, he only spent about 21 days trying to convince them, and then he thought, I'm not doing this right. I've got to talk to people at their capacity to understand. Not talk down to them. Not to say, well, all you understand is cows and milk. But realizing that in that caste, they were able to think about certain things deeply, and other things just were out of possibility. So he would conform his teaching to meet better with their expectations. And so he was clever about teaching around that, so that he could validate their expectation and give them tools that they didn't understand would enlighten them beyond what they were doing, because he didn't set that up in the teaching for them. So that meant that, certain levels of understanding, certain levels of awakening, he didn't talk about right away until he raised, keep hearing noises outside, sorry. He didn't raise people's capacity beyond what they were capable of. Now, also for that reason, what happens as his circle of devotees grows is that the ones that really stick with it become disciples. The lay people, they kind of come later, and they kind of come through the disciples and their activities. And so what happens with a lot of the earlier sutras, the earlier teachings in the first, second, third phase of Buddha's teaching life, he spends a lot of time talking about the life of the dedicated, monastery monk. You're dedicated now, you're going to get this, and your expectation is going to grow. As we spend years learning this, and I see your capacity growing, and you leave the caste mentality more and more, I'll be able to introduce concepts that push your capacity and push it more. This won't happen naturally in civilization for 500,000, 1,500, 2,000 years after I'm gone. But for you devotees, we're going to push you there, and you're going to get it ahead of time. And over time, as you maintain these teachings, even if you don't quite get them, but you maintain them the way I teach them to you, out of honoring my enlightenment, the people that come 500 years from now that have learned from you and so forth will get it. So it's your mission, it's your responsibility to keep this exactly as I'm telling it to you. Now, what that means is that if he taught for 60 years approximately of his life, and the first phase was kind of an utter disaster, certainly by the time he got to the third phase, he was now talking to people that had pretty sharp minds. Just by default, they were of higher caste. And so, whereas somebody of a Brahmin class, who is what he was trying to raise in their minds anyway, would have a deep appreciation for what he was saying, somebody of a middle caste, a businessman, being a businessman, his nature would be to say, okay, you've said it all here. I'm going to set up a temple. I'm going to work with these other 100 people that know me and that I teach. And we're going to start spreading the word of Buddha. And they go off and, they tell their children and their descendants, and those people tell theirs. And a whole sect is born of Buddhist teachings. But those people, those businessmen, I'm just illustrating an example, that had that left, that stopped following him as he traveled throughout India. They didn't keep up with the new stuff he was saying, and the next phase, and the last phase. He didn't hear any of that. So as a result, there's a whole population of people that know Buddhism as these three phases, and that's it. So when 100 years goes by and somebody comes back and introduces them to a fourth phase phasing, they go, where the hell did you hear that? That's not it at all. You've got to come to our temple. You'll really learn Buddhism. So this is how Buddhism started the fracture in different sects. And you can understand, I can understand that, and I could understand that for 1,000 years. The problem is that after 1,000 years, people started traveling around at a pretty good rate, especially as, I mean, you can't believe the effort it took to cross the Himalayas and get these teachings into northern China. That's why it entered southern China first, through Sri Lanka and Burma, all that. Which today is no surprise, is the largest group of Theravada, Tripitaka, Visappana, whatever, everything under Theravada exists in that area of, not so much southern, well, a little bit in southern China, but out into Malaysia, southern China, Sri Lanka, Burma, what's it called today? Anyway, through that region, even in southern India. India actually has a lot of kingdom revolutions where Buddhism was actually abolished. So actually, I would say China was more responsible so far in the history of Buddhism because they already had Confucianism, they had Taoism about the same time as Buddha came in, but Taoism was in China first. They were already deep thinkers about the nature of life, the nature of happiness, the nature of how human beings interact. And what are the results, and therefore what are the more proper ways to act to avoid certain negative results, that kind of thing. So Buddhism was a pretty good fit for the intellectuals in China, and it spread like wildfire. But China, very, very dedicated to scholarship, the correctness of things, okay? And that became an aspect of Buddhism very quickly. It also existed in India because you had a whole caste that was dedicated to just correctness, the Brahmin class, right? And the disciples of Buddha considered themselves the Brahmin class. They were raised by Buddha. But here's the thing, is that ultimately, like science, there's going to be a Stephen Hawking. There's going to be a Einstein. There's going to be Galileo. There's going to be, I'm talking science, but you could do the same thing with philosophies, with Plato and then Aristotle and Socrates, so on. There's always, as something progresses through a long period of time, somebody comes through, looks at it, and now they have the capacity that they go, that's what that means. And all these other people that are talking about it aren't quite getting it right, and because they're not getting it right, they're repeating erroneous things that kind of confuse and don't teach right. And so they have to be very strict and go, this here, you got to stop saying this. This is totally wrong. But they have to prove themselves because they're very strong opinions here. So before you can claim that you're the one who knows, you got to debate. And so debate became a very strong part of Buddhist teachings evolution. And there was always, in every era, an excellent debater. Today, I call the Buddhism that this Sangha that I founded practices quantum life, or quantum life energy, quantum life force, or just quantum life Buddhism. I come from a scientific background and a fine arts background, which is an odd mix perhaps, but it works for me. There's a lot of logic in both, and there's a lot of introspection and inspection in both. And when I discovered the Buddha's teachings, I discovered it through a sect of Buddhism. I had read about Buddhism without even knowing about the divisions of sects. That's S-E-C-T-S, if I'm not enunciating that well. But I wanted to start by reading something of scholarship by the sect that introduced me to Buddhism. So and that was the Nichiren sect. Now there's a handful of Nichiren sects. But throughout all of Buddha's teachings, he exhorted in every teaching that my Buddha's teachings will cease to exist without three things. You have to practice it. I mean, that's like anything. You have to study deeply. And he was a very big proponent of not just studying all of his teachings, but other teachings. Because he was so assured of how clear and correct his vision, his enlightenment was, that he wasn't afraid to read anything. Read Muslims, read Islam, read Jewish, whatever. Zoroastrianism, just read anything. As you practice Buddhism. Because what you will find after some point is that everything else is trying to answer these questions, and they never really come to an answer. The best they can do is shove it off to after you're dead and say, well, it all happens there. But in that way, you'll gain greater and greater confidence in what I'm telling you. Because this is the answer. You just don't know you're living it already. All right? So, why Nichiren Buddhism? Well, he's the most recent scholarship within the Buddhist realm. There is lots of scholarship today outside the Buddhist realm. Scholars in Harvard University and Cambridge and all over the world, just to name some. Hawaii has great religious studies departments and scholars there at their university. So does Santa Barbara in California. I've been to some of these in research myself because I take study very, very seriously. And here's the thing: is as you study, it's really obvious that not only does the Buddha repeat the same thing over and over again since day one, but even though he had to manipulate the teachings for the people to understand what he was saying, they're not really complete and fully impactful until you get to the last one. Why doesn't that make sense to anyone, right? I mean, you can start baking cakes and the first one comes out okay. The same ingredients, and after you've done the third, fourth, or fifth one, suddenly you can kick that cake out into perfection every single time. Subtle things. This is flour and salt and, but practice makes perfect. Ta-da. And so practice, study, and a determined mind, have conviction that the answer is here. Because it is here. The only thing missing is your perspective, your perception. So we're going to grow your perception. This is why oftentimes you'll hear me say that Buddhism is a science of mind, or that it's a training, a retraining of the mind to have broader and deeper capacity. It's always about capacity. Okay? So, why do I call this quantum life Buddhism? Because the last time Nichiren wrote anything about Buddhism was in the 13th century. At the end of the 13th century. I think he died in 1282. Since then, there's been a tremendous amount of scholarship. But it's not that they disprove or improve upon what Nichiren taught, which was largely what Tendai taught Qi in China back in the 7th century. It was 645, I think. He just modernized it. 700 years later, he modernized it. Good for him. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take the same clear, full 5 phases of Buddha's teachings, and I'm trying to make people who are far more advanced. Our entire vocabulary and language is different just because we have science, just because we have mathematics. You and I can talk about quantum. We can talk about energy and matter. And look, E equals MC squared. That's a 20th century enlightenment that people still don't understand. E, energy, equals is matter at different speeds. At the speed of light squared. The bottom line is, all matter is energy in varying states. Everything is energy. If you can just grapple with Einstein's statement and research that for a while, and then come back to looking at Buddhism, a lot of the language will suddenly start to connect. And that's all I'm doing here, is I'm taking the language just like Nichiren does in this one, and you can see I scribbled all over it. These are my notes, and I will put them online once I integrate my blobs into it. But I will put, this is one of Nichiren's writings, The Errors of the 8 Schools. So, once again, Buddhism is about scholarship and study. And Nichiren was one of the most foremost debaters everywhere he went. He started studying at the age of 12. He came to his realization at the age of 30, 33. And from then on, he just went all over China debating anyone who would see him or talk to him. I think he even went to India and debate with them on what was the correct interpretation, or for that matter, what was the correct order of the teachings, and what were erroneous. Tendai was the master at that in the 7th century, and then it fell on Nichiren to go around and clean up and disprove, and as well as prove the correct teaching. So I don't consider myself that class of debater, but I do consider myself an excellent student. And because I'm an excellent student, I can give you a lot of information that has been had its way cleared by excellent debaters and scholars. That's what I'm trying to do. So I can't really claim, although I practice, our Sangha is in the lineage of Nichiren. And this is where lineage becomes important, because are you going to call Ronald McDonald a scholar? You might. And if that's part of your path to learning something, you can't deny that you're in the Ronald McDonald path. That's not my path. I'm following a scholarship that's age-old and proven and debated and in the books and even by current scholars. So I'm all about modern scholarship as well as ancient scholarship. But, you know, ancient scholarship can have a dead end at Zen, for instance, and they start writing their own scripture. And there's a lot of truth in it. So I don't blame people for practicing it. I don't blame people for practicing Theravada Buddhism. But they're not getting the full story. And that's unfortunate because it's going to be very hard for them to awaken. This is already 30 minutes. Should I start this? All right. Let me just... Maybe I'll just make this a short introduction, because this is going to be one meaty talk. We're gonna talk here about the historical Buddha versus the revealed Buddha, the three bodies of Buddha. The language can get in the way here. So this is what I want to do with this, is that this is a good argument that Nichiren makes for why his interpretation, his writing of the Gohonzon behind me, his choice of the characters to represent the Buddha's teachings, he respects his lineage. And Miao-Lo, Dengyo, Saicho, after Tendai. There's a tremendous amount of scholarship about that period of time. If you read, there's an American author, her name is Jacqueline Stone, wrote a tremendous amount about the rituals of Buddhism that led or that followed the history into the Kamakura period, the shogunates and the age of samurais, which informs the situation Nichiren was born into. It's very engrossing reading. It's not your average, it's not your Pulp Fiction, all right? You got, it's thesis language, okay? It's elevated language in English about a period that, we have movies about, but we still don't fully grasp the Asian mind. So I would suggest that as reading, for one. But I want to demystify this for you. When we talk about the Buddha having the Dharma body, the reward body, and the manifested body, the manifested body kind of all makes sense to us. And you go, oh yeah, that's the person Buddha. But we're very quick to assign that to Buddha, and it's kind of it's misleading, because the other two bodies, the reward body and the Dharma body, are more what Buddha is than the manifested body. The manifested body was just a provisional device to help us see that as a human physical thing, we are actually something much greater, and we're very limited in our perception as seeing ourselves as simply what we see in the mirror. In other words, how much of your identity do you think is what you think? Now that I say it, you probably go, "Oh yeah, that's me." That's the John, Joan, whatever ness of me. My Sylvain-ness is what I see in the mirror. But what makes me Sylvain isn't what I see in the mirror. It's what I think. So really, as you start to think more and more about that, isn't what you're called kind of a misleading device? Because everyone who knows you as something, someone different. They can't possibly, not anyone knows all of you, not even you. So everyone who knows you in a different way. And you may say, hey, Sylvain, and they'll think, oh yeah, I know Sylvain. Because they know something that they didn't like about me, and they stopped there. They didn't get to know all of me. And somebody else, oh yeah, I know that guy, he's really interesting. And then the other person went, really? I never knew him. I thought, he ran over my dog, or whatever their memory is. So my point is to say that Buddha, you understand Buddha because he was manifested in a body called Buddha, that was just a provisional stunt, just like this is. But already that's sounding like, what? What are you talking about? Okay. So the reward body is your ability to think. Your reward body is understanding that you are much more your thoughts than you are your physical body. But why are your thoughts so supreme in who you are? Why are they of much more importance in defining who and what you are than your body? Well, the Dharma body, the Dharma being all of the teachings and the understanding of the meaning of the teachings. People get stuck on words. The words are important, but they're like fingers pointing. If all your attention is focused on the finger pointing, you will never see the glory of what's being shown you. This is the same with the writings of Buddha, or any writing actually, but certainly you've heard that saying before. Do not concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all of the wonder. That's because the wonder is in what's being described, what's being pointed out, the meaning, the substance. Just like you are you because of your substance in thought, not in substance of the fat that's on your bones. Right? So the Dharma body is the meaning, the what is being seen, the wonder. And the wonder is, bottom line from day one, we are Buddha. We're in Buddha, we're made of Buddha, and we are Buddha. All this stuff is like, it's invented in our mind. It's something that we've created to have this happy little entertaining experience. But ultimately, when we leave this mortal coil, what awaits us is us. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. But it sounds a little goofy when I say it that way. And all of the teachings of Buddha are incredibly granular in explaining how that works. I said this again, I don't know if I've said this on a video yet, but I was talking to somebody, they were asking me about, they were in a situation and well, I'll say he, I don't want to name names, but he noticed, we've been talking about Buddhism a bit, so he's really been cueing in on being aware of how he does things. And he noticed that right away when he saw some information about this person that he didn't know before, in him was this whole revulsion, emotional, excuse me, and he got very angry. And he thought about that. I don't know how long he spent talking about it before he talked to me, but it was, within a day. And he realized, he said, he sat down and he thought about it. He goes, man, that really took me by surprise. I was instantly angry and started thinking totally different about this person that I thought I knew. He goes, man, I wanted to know why I thought that way. And I started asking myself questions, and they took me places to things like my childhood and the way I think about money and all this other stuff. And I said, well, first of all, congratulations. It's very important to be able to be aware enough of your thoughts that you can catch them in the act. But the second step you took is what's confounding you. One of the things we do as contemporary people is always ask why. I mean, it's the first question a child asks when it learns how to talk, right? It could drive you nuts. Little 2-year-old running around, why? Because, right? It drives you crazy. But I'm not going to talk about what that means to a 2-year-old. I just want you to understand why is a really basic nurture nature kind of thing. The more appropriate question when it comes to the practice of Buddhism, the way Buddha taught us to think, that will lead to substantial answers is how? How did that arise in my mind? The language starts to change, you see? How did that thought arise? From what foundation did it build itself, this thought? Now, they may be similar, but believe me, the process of dealing with how is far different from why. Why kind of just takes us through a romp, through, and there's this and there's that and that probably, yeah, blah, 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 and it all becomes some kind of muddy justification, and you go on, you haven't changed anything. But you're real proud of yourself. You know why. But if you know how, that means that now you're starting to think much more profoundly about how your perception, your cognitive, your epistemology, the things that form the things that you think are knowledge, how did that come to be? How does that work? Because now if I understand how, I can actually change it. I can affect it. I can influence it. Can't do much about why. And that's kind of fallout. It's kind of a misleading place to go. Does that make sense? So I think that's a pretty good meaty. That's something, in other words, that we would meditate about. And I'm going to cover why some meditations are superior to others. I'm going to touch upon that when I go into this into the next lecture. But I think after over 40 minutes of talking to you, I've done a really thorough job of setting this up. But I want to give you a break, and you can watch the next video right after this as soon as I publish it, of course. But for just the logistics of time, I'm going to leave you with that thought. The how the mind works is far more productive thinking than why. And we're going to get into some of the debate information that someone like Nichiren used to demonstrate why 8 of the other popular schools, the major schools of Buddhism in Japan at the time around him, what they were missing, and how it's in the teachings themselves that you can see. It's very obvious. Anyone who studies all of the teachings can see earlier teachings. But if you know anything about astronomy today, cosmology from the shows we watch on TV, to deny all of that today and to say that I'm a mathematician because I understand algebra, it's kind of like it's really a false statement. It's not. If you want to call yourself a mathematician, you better at least know calculus and further, because there's just so much advancement. How can you run around? It's like calling yourself a building contractor to build a big old bridge downtown in your town that's going to handle, hundreds of thousands of cars every month. Because you built a wagon when you were 10 years old, that does not make you the builder of bridges. So this is why the scholarship is so important. This is why the lineage is important. So those who follow Nichiren are following the most evolved scholarship within the Buddhist order of Buddhist teachings. And he is very respective of the lineage he followed. Okay, all the way back to Buddha. So this is quantum life Buddhism. It's based on Nichiren Buddhism. But we don't practice quantum life or Nichiren or Tendai or Nagarjuna or any. All of us are practicing Buddha. That's our teacher, his teachings. We are just respectful of a lineage that's kept it clear and made it relevant to our capacity and our time. So when I say quantum Buddhism, I'm not saying, hey buddy, I'm the one with all the answers. I know Buddhism best, and all of these others, they don't know what they're doing. I am in effect saying that I am communicating all of the Buddhist teachings in their entirety through a line of lineage that I print on my website. You can see it everywhere. So I can demonstrate the scholarship that I follow. I'm just a new label describing the time that I'm teaching in, so that I can try to put my little mark on that lineage. Not that I'm a Nichiren, but I am somebody who's contemporary to you. And so I feel that I can, with language, with visual aids, with my funny face, and the way I talk, transmit the incredible depth and beauty of these teachings to you in a language that you're familiar with, instead of having to slog through like 30 years of study to finally go, now I get it. That's what I'm doing. Now I get it. So I want you to get it. I want it to be easier for you to get it, so that you can get to enlightenment as quickly as possible. And with that, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you listening. Make comments. Email me. Challenge me. Make me a better debater. But chant. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care until next time, and I'll get to it as quickly as I can. Sometimes the mouth just refuses to function. Take care. If I can manage to figure out how to broadcast the New Year's Gongyo, I'll do it. But I think I'm not going to be able to get to that this year. But chant on your own, even if we can mentally connect this year. Have a great holiday season. I love you guys. Take care.